Well, it was the first time in the 90s when Warren Buffett uttered the word moat investing, and since then it has been actively pursued by investors and fund managers across the world. People who practice it successfully have been making gigantic returns by effective implementation of moat investing. Today, the guest I have on the show is Heather Brilliant, a specialist on moat investing and CEO of Morningstar Australia. Heather, thanks a lot for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Moat investing is gathering a lot of momentum here in India. People who are practicing it, fund managers want to learn more about it. Talk to us about moat investing. How do we identify moats in Indian market? Which are the companies which you think have very strong moats around them?
Right. I think that there's a lot of different ways to look for companies with moats. We start by looking for one of 5 sources. We look for companies with intangible assets, with a network effect, with a cost advantage, or that have the ability to kind of operate within a more defined market, what we call efficient scale. And switching costs is the last one. So we really look for companies that fundamentally benefit from one or more of those sources.
So I'm not sure how closely you actually look at Indian markets, but which are a couple of companies which you can talk to us as examples which have very strong moats around them?
Yep. So among the companies that we cover in India, we find Dr. Reddy and Infosys as 2 examples of companies with really strong narrow moats that we think have built very sustainable businesses.
So when fund managers over here in India and asset managers go about identifying these moats, what are the things they should keep in mind so that they can pinpoint such companies which have strong moats?
Well, when you're kind of entering a new market or looking at the Indian market broadly, it might be good to look for companies that have high returns on equity or high margins, or something that could be evidence of a possible moat. And that kind of helps with the screening process, because otherwise it's very overwhelming to analyze every company in a market. So we use screens to try to get a better idea quantitatively of which companies to dig into in more detail.
So how do you think returns in successful implementation of moat investing can be relatively much more than people who purely go about looking at the different ratios, etc., and business models when they analyze? How can this be much more rewarding?
I think one of the most important benefits of using moats in your investment process is that you're really taking a different time horizon. You know, we look at a company's competitive advantage over 10 to 20 year periods, and so you're really looking at that long-term competitive advantage. The other thing I'd say is that finding companies with moats is not enough. It's necessary but insufficient. You also need to look at valuation. And so, you know, buying companies that are very strong from a competitive advantage standpoint when they're cheap is what we think is the key to success.
So correction time is actually the best time so you can identify moats and then keep waiting when the low tide comes in, then you actually dive in, right?
Exactly, that's the best way.
Okay, talk to us about what exactly are specific moats. Is technology a moat? What are the other things, or management quality is a moat? What are the other things which are good examples of moat in any company?
So actually, I wouldn't put either of those alone as enough to demonstrate a moat. I think if you're thinking about intangible assets, you could see a benefit from a really strong management team, but unless you can really see that coming through in the structural business itself, we wouldn't consider management as sufficient to form an economic moat. We'd really be looking for things like a brand that compels consumers to pay more, or maybe a government regulation that protects a company's ability to charge a certain price. Branded pharmaceutical companies would be an example of that.
Right. Pharmaceutical companies are coming under intense pressure because of some of the comments by Mr. Trump. But globally, when you were conducting this research, which are the companies which you may have backtested that at one point in time were much smaller size, but because they had strong moats around them and they were picked up by reputed fund managers, over a period of time they became very huge companies, and the returns obviously were much bigger. Talk to us about some of the examples from your study.
Well, one example is Facebook. Actually, when Facebook went public, it was still a relatively small company, and there was a lot of skepticism about the IPO. People thought it was overpriced and that it wasn't a good investment. And so it did quite poorly right after the IPO, which was a great opportunity for us to be able to say, actually, this is an amazing network effect, and we think this is a wide mode business. I think IPOs actually can frequently be an opportunity to invest in a business that is perhaps worth more than the market is seeing at the time. time. So the same thing happened when Visa went public many years ago. I think that was a decade ago now. And the market really underestimated the value of the network that Visa had built.
Heather, last question to you. In your Morningstar Moat Index, which are the companies? Talk to us about the components which form that. Are there any Indian companies, or can you, in sometime in future date, consider including any Indian company in the Moat Index of yours?
So today we have a couple of different indexes that use our moat research. The one that we talk about the most is the Morningstar Wide Moat Focus, and that one is unfortunately constrained to only U.S. companies. But we do have one that we came up with more recently, which is an international version, and Indian companies would certainly be eligible for inclusion in that.
All right, we'll wait for that time when Indian companies also be a part of that. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.